The A-10 Thunderbolt II touched down at Kandahar airfield at 3:47 hours, and that's when everyone knew something had gone catastrophically wrong. The aircraft came in dark, no exterior lights, landing gear screaming against worn hydraulics. Tower had been calling for 15 minutes straight. No response. Just the howl of those twin turbofans cutting through the Afghan night, lower and rougher than they should have been. The Warthog rolled to a stop near the maintenance hangars, not the flight line. Wrong place, wrong protocol. The canopy didn't open. Ground crew rushed forward with flashlights and emergency equipment, but they stopped dead when they got close enough to see inside. The pilot's seat was empty, harness unbuckled, hanging loose, helmet on the floor, but the aircraft had just landed itself, or someone had brought it home and vanished before the wheels stopped rolling. The control stick showed fresh blood. Not much, just enough to catch the light. On the dash panel, scrawled in grease pencil, were 6 words that made the senior master sergeant reach for his radio with shaking hands. "Tell Ironside his daughter came back." No one on base had clearance high enough to know who Ironside was. But 30 minutes later, a convoy of blacked-out Suburbans rolled through the front gate without stopping, and 4 men in civilian clothes with dead eyes and suppressed weapons walked straight onto the tarmac like they owned it. Navy Special Warfare insignia, the tridents barely visible under their kit. SEALs. They didn't speak to anyone, just walked around the A-10 in silence, studying the battle damage. 763 holes. Someone had counted. 30mm cannon fire, shrapnel scoring, and something else. Scorch marks that didn't match any known weapons system. The senior SEAL, a man called Crow who moved like violence was his first language, finally looked up at the maintenance chief and asked one question. "Where's the pilot?" The chief shook his head. "Sir, there wasn't one when it landed." Crow stared at him for a long moment, then looked back at the A-10, at the blood on the stick, at the message on the panel. "Yes, there was," he said quietly. "She just didn't want you to see her leave." That's when the real story started to come out, piece by piece, through classified channels and whispered conversations in secure rooms. The story of call sign Revenant. The story of Cale Thorne, the woman who'd been dead for 3 years, and the aircraft that had been gathering dust in a hangar at Bagram before someone fired it up and flew it into a mission that was never supposed to exist. Cale Thorne had disappeared from official records in 2019. Her service jacket sealed under so many classifications that even her death certificate was redacted. She'd been an A-10 pilot, one of the best, back when the Air Force was still trying to retire the Warthog, and everyone who flew it had a chip on their shoulder about keeping the ugly bastard alive. She'd flown close air support missions in Iraq and Syria, earned 3 distinguished flying crosses and a Silver Star, and developed a reputation for bringing troops home when no one else could reach them. The grunts loved her. Command tolerated her because she got results, even when she ignored half the rules to do it. Her call sign, Revenant, came from a mission over Mosul where she'd been hit so badly that Tower declared her aircraft non-flyable and told her to eject. She'd refused, kept flying, limped the A-10 back across 200 miles of hostile territory on one engine and fumes, then put it down on a highway outside friendly lines because the landing gear wouldn't extend. Walked away without a scratch. The A-10 had taken 1,100 rounds of ground fire. Maintenance said it should have come apart in midair. She just shrugged and said the jet wasn't done yet. 3 months later, she'd volunteered for something that didn't have a name, didn't have a mission brief, didn't officially exist. Something involving special operations, embedded reconnaissance, and areas of Syria where the United States wasn't supposed to be operating. She'd gone wheels up on October morning with full ordnance and a smile that didn't reach her eyes, and she'd never come back. The aircraft had been recovered barely. Her body hadn't. Eventually, they'd held a memorial service with an empty coffin and moved on, because that's what the military does. But here's the thing about classified operations and soldiers who disappear into them. Sometimes they don't stay disappeared. The SEAL team that found the A-10 at Kandahar started pulling records, and what they found made them request a secure conference room and an encrypted satellite link to JSOC headquarters. Because 3 years ago, when Cale Thorne had gone missing, her last known operation had been providing close air support for a six-man SEAL reconnaissance element operating near the Iraqi-Syrian border. The mission had gone bad. Ambush, heavy contact, communications down. The SEALs had called for air support and gotten Revenant, who'd come in low enough to read the terror on their faces and stayed on station for 4 hours, burning through her entire combat load and then some, keeping enemy fighters pinned while the team extracted on foot through 40 miles of desert. She'd saved all 6 men. Then she disappeared into a classified mission that nobody would talk about, and 2 weeks later the Air Force had quietly declared her missing, presumed dead. Now, 3 years later, an A-10 bearing her old tail number had appeared out of nowhere, flown a combat mission that shouldn't have been possible, and delivered itself to Kandahar with a message that made those same SEALs drop everything and fly halfway around the world. Because Ironside was Master Chief Marcus Hale, and 3 years ago his daughter had been with him on that desert extraction. Navy corpsman, attached to the SEAL team, caught in the same ambush. She'd taken shrapnel, bad enough that she wouldn't have made the 40-mile walk. Revenant had known that, had broken about 60 regulations by setting the A-10 down on a desert road long enough for them to load the wounded corpsman into the small space behind the ejection seat. It wasn't designed for passengers, barely had room to breathe, but Cale had made it work. Had flown that girl out at treetop level while taking fire from 3 directions, got her to a field hospital, saved her life. Then disappeared forever 2 weeks later. Master Chief Hale stood on the Kandahar tarmac at dawn, looking at the A-10 that had landed itself, and his hands were steady but his eyes were not. His daughter was alive because of Cale Thorne. His entire team had made it home because of her. And now, 3 years after everyone had given her up for dead, her aircraft had come back with a message meant specifically for him. The other SEALs, Crow's team, watched him in silence. They knew what it meant when ghosts started speaking. When the dead found ways to communicate. When pilots who'd been erased from existence managed to fly one more mission and leave one more message. It meant something was very wrong, and it meant that somewhere out there, Cale Thorne might still be alive and in trouble. Hale walked slowly around the A-10, examining the damage with the eye of someone who'd spent decades in combat zones and knew what weapons made what marks. The 30mm holes were from a Russian ZSU-23-4 mobile anti-aircraft system. The shrapnel scoring was from RPG proximity bursts, but those scorch marks, the ones that didn't match anything in the books, those bothered him. They were precise, almost surgical, and they traced patterns across the fuselage that looked deliberate, like someone had been trying to write something. He climbed up on the crew ladder, looked into the cockpit, saw the blood on the stick and the grease pencil message on the panel, saw something else too. Tucked into the map pocket beside the seat was a folded piece of paper, brown with age and desert dust. He pulled it out carefully, unfolded it. A photograph. 6 men in desert camouflage, weapons slung, exhausted smiles, standing beside an A-10 with Revenant painted below the canopy. His team, 3 years ago. On the back, in handwriting he recognized, were coordinates and a date. Tomorrow's date. The mission brief came through encrypted channels 6 hours later, classified so far above top secret that it didn't even have a proper designation. Just a reference number and the word Obsidian in red letters across the header. JSOC had authorized a direct action operation into eastern Syria, target location matching the coordinates from the photograph. Personnel restricted to Special Operations Forces with prior operational relationship to call sign Revenant. Translation: the 6 SEALs she'd saved 3 years ago, plus air support, plus anything else they needed to bring her home. Crow assembled the team in a secure hangar. 6 men who'd been scattered across 3 continents, running their own operations, all pulled back and ready to move within 12 hours. That's what happens when someone saves your life. You remember, you come when called, even if the call comes from a ghost. She's alive, Crow said, no preamble, no wasted words. Or she was 48 hours ago when she flew that A-10 out of wherever the hell she's been for 3 years. The coordinates put her in the middle of nowhere, Syrian desert, no infrastructure, no known facilities. But something's there and she wants us to find it. The men listened in silence. These weren't the young SEALs fresh out of training, all bravado and enthusiasm. These were the operators who'd been doing this long enough to know that sometimes the missions that matter most are the ones that don't officially exist. That sometimes you go into the dark places to bring back the people who went there first. She saved all of us, Hale said quietly. Got my daughter out when she should have left her behind to save herself. Flew that pile of shit warthog through hell itself to make sure we made it home. I don't care what command says. I don't care what the politics are. She called, we answer, simple as that. The team wheels up from Kandahar at 2200 hours in a MH-47 Chinook, flying dark and low across the border into Syria. Two-door gunners, full combat load, enough ordnance to level a small city. The air asset was interesting. Not another A-10, because there weren't any available in theater that could be spared. Not F-16s or F-18s, because this mission didn't officially exist and fast movers left paper trails. What they got was a single B-1B Lancer, flying high cover at 40,000 feet, loaded with precision-guided munitions, and a crew that had been briefed to answer exactly one call sign. Revenant. If she was alive, if she made contact, the Lancer would turn that entire grid square into a parking lot to cover their extraction. The flight into Syria was routine by special operations standards, which meant it was terrifying to anyone else. Terrain following at 200 feet, weaving through valleys, using every scrap of cover the landscape provided. The pilots were Night Stalkers, 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, and they flew like the helicopter was an extension of their nervous system. No wasted movement, no hesitation, just smooth, deadly precision through hostile airspace. Hale sat in the troop compartment, checking his weapon for the 5th time, not because it needed checking but because his hands needed something to do. The coordinates from the photograph had been analyzed by intelligence specialists, cross-referenced with satellite imagery, signals intelligence, every source available. They'd found nothing. Empty desert. No structures, no roads, no emissions. Just sand and rock and the kind of nothing that made people nervous because nothing was never really nothing. The Chinook dropped them 6 kilometers from the target coordinates at 1:30 hours, landing just long enough for 12 men to bail out and disappear into the desert night. The helicopter was gone 30 seconds later, leaving nothing but rotor wash and silence. The team moved in a tactical column, spacing perfect, weapons up, night vision turning the landscape into shades of green and black. Every man here had done this 1,000 times, knew how to read the terrain, how to move without sound, how to become part of the environment. The desert was cold at night, temperature dropping into the 40s, and the sand still held the heat of the day in pockets where the wind didn't reach. They covered ground fast, not running but moving with the steady ground-eating pace that special operations units perfect over years of training. 4 kilometers, 3, 2, nothing changed. Just empty desert, rock formations that looked like ancient bones jutting from the sand, wind that whispered across the dunes like breathing. Hale called a halt at 1 kilometer out, and the team went aground, pulling out thermal optics and observation equipment. They watched. That's what made these men different from regular infantry, from the conventional forces who kicked down doors and fought pitched battles. SEALs knew how to be patient, how to observe, how to find the thing that didn't belong in a landscape that looked empty. 20 minutes passed, 30. Then Crow saw it, not a structure, not an installation, just a change in the way the wind moved across a particular section of desert like it was hitting something that wasn't visible. Heat shimmer where there shouldn't be heat shimmer. He tapped the thermal operator, pointed. The operator adjusted his scope, cycled through filters, then went very still. Jesus Christ, he whispered, there's something there. The facility was underground, buried so deep that it barely registered on thermal scans. But there were ventilation shafts, hidden under camouflage netting and sand-colored covers, exhausting air that was 20 degrees warmer than the ambient temperature. There were pressure sensors buried in the desert floor, forming a perimeter that would alert anyone inside if something heavier than a dog crossed the line. There were fiber-optic cameras disguised as rocks, watching approaches from 6 directions. The SEALs mapped it all, patient and methodical, building a picture of what they were facing. Whoever had built this place knew what they were doing, knew how to hide from satellites and drones and reconnaissance aircraft, knew how to create something that didn't exist on any map, in any database, in any intelligence report, which meant it was either a deep black government facility or something worse. Hale studied the perimeter through his optics, looking for the thing that would tell him how to get inside. Every facility had a weakness. Every security system had a gap. You just had to know where to look. He found it in the eastern approach, where a shallow wadi cut through the desert floor and the terrain made sensor placement difficult. Not impossible, but difficult enough that there was a gap, maybe 10 meters wide, where the coverage wasn't perfect. Enough for a team that knew what they were doing. He signaled the plan with hand gestures. 4 men on the perimeter, security and overwatch. 2 men with him making entry, the rest on standby for whatever came next. They moved like shadows, using the wadi for cover, staying low and slow. The gap in the sensor coverage was exactly where Hale had calculated, and they slipped through without triggering any alarms. At least, none that they could detect. The entrance was a reinforced hatch set flush with the desert floor, covered with sand and designed to be invisible from more than 10 feet away. But there were scratches in the sand around the edges, fresh enough to catch the moonlight. Someone had been here recently. Someone had opened this hatch. Hale knelt beside it, examining the locking mechanism. Not electronic. Mechanical, old school, the kind of lock that couldn't be hacked remotely but could be picked if you knew what you were doing. He pulled out a tension wrench and a pick, worked the lock with steady hands while the other 2 SEALs provided security. The lock clicked open after 90 seconds. Hale looked at his teammates, got nods in return and pulled the hatch open. Darkness below and a ladder descending into it. The smell that came up was wrong. Not the musty scent of an abandoned facility or the chemical smell of an active one. Something else. Blood and aviation fuel and something metallic that made Hale think of field hospitals and emergency surgery. He went down first, weapon leading, night vision active. The tunnel at the bottom was narrow, reinforced concrete, heading deeper underground at a slight angle. Emergency lighting strips along the floor, dark now but still present. Electrical conduits running along the ceiling. This was a professional installation, built with serious resources and serious intent. The tunnel opened into a larger space after 30 meters, and that's where they found the first body. A man in civilian clothes, Middle Eastern features, gunshot wound to the chest. Dead maybe 48 hours based on the state of decomposition. His weapon was still in his hand, an AK-47 with the safety off. He died fighting something, but there was no return fire damage anywhere in the tunnel, no brass casings, no blood trail from whatever had killed him. They found 6 more bodies before they reached the main facility chamber, all armed, all killed with precision that spoke of professional training. Single shots, center mass or head, no wasted ammunition. Someone had fought through this entire complex, and they'd done it efficiently. The main chamber was large, maybe 50 feet across, with workstations and equipment that looked like a mixture of communications gear and something else. Manufacturing equipment. Precision tools. Materials that Hale didn't recognize, but that made him think of weapons development and things that people weren't supposed to have. In the center of the chamber was an A-10 Thunderbolt II, or what was left of one. Not the same aircraft that had landed at Kandahar. This one was older, more damaged, pieces of it scattered across the floor like someone had been cannibalizing it for parts. On the fuselage, barely visible under the damage and dirt, was a tail number. Revenant's original aircraft, the one she'd been flying 3 years ago when she disappeared. Hale moved closer, his weapon forgotten for a moment, staring at the pieces of the Warthog that had saved his life, that had saved his daughter, that had been flown by a woman who was supposed to be dead but who had somehow survived 3 years in this underground nightmare and flown herself out 2 days ago in a different aircraft. On the floor beside the aircraft, written in what looked like dried blood, was a message. 3 words, "They're still here." The attack came 30 seconds later, not from the entrance they'd used but from another tunnel on the opposite side of the chamber. Gunfire, muzzle flashes in the darkness, rounds snapping past close enough to feel the pressure wave. The SEALs responded instantly, muscle memory and training taking over, dropping behind cover and returning fire with controlled bursts. Hale caught a glimpse of the attackers, saw men in mismatched tactical gear, some in desert camouflage, some in black, all armed with weapons that looked too modern for a group operating out of an underground bunker in the Syrian desert. Russian rifles, Chinese optics, American body armor. These weren't local militia or terrorist fighters. These were contractors, professionals, the kind of people who worked for governments that didn't want to be officially involved. The firefight was brutal and close, 40 feet of open space with very little cover, rounds ricocheting off concrete and metal, and sending shrapnel in every direction. One of the SEALs took a hit in the shoulder, body armor catching most of it but putting him down behind a workstation. The other SEAL dragged him back, while Hale provided covering fire, burning through magazines with the kind of discipline that came from 2 decades of doing this. The attackers had numbers, maybe 15 or 20 men, but they were bunching up in the tunnel entrance, too many bodies trying to push through too small a space. Classic mistake. Hale pulled a fragmentation grenade from his kit, cooked it for 2 seconds, then threw it with precision born of practice. The explosion turned the tunnel entrance into a charnel house, bodies blown back, screaming, the attack faltering for crucial seconds. The SEALs used the break to reposition, falling back toward another tunnel that led deeper into the facility, dragging their wounded teammate with them. The tunnel descended at a steep angle, emergency lighting still active here, casting everything in red shadows that made the blood on their uniforms look black. Behind them, they could hear the attackers regrouping, shouting in multiple languages, the sound of boots on concrete getting closer. Hale spoke into his radio-encrypted burst transmission, calling for the air asset. Revenant to Bone 1, we are in contact. Facility is hot. Multiple hostiles, requesting immediate air support on my coordinates. The response came back in less than 5 seconds. The voice of the B-1B pilot calm and professional despite the fact that she was about to drop bombs on a target that didn't officially exist. Bone 1 copies, Revenant. Ordnance inbound, danger close. Recommend you get deep and stay deep. The tunnel opened into another chamber, this one smaller, set up like living quarters. Bunks against the walls, personal effects scattered across tables, evidence that people had been living here for extended periods. And in the corner, chained to a support column with heavy-duty restraints, was a woman. Emaciated, filthy, wearing flight suit remnants that were more holes than fabric. But her eyes were alert, burning with intelligence and fury, and when she saw Hale her lips pulled back in something that might have been a smile if smiles could contain 3 years of rage and pain and determination. "Took you long enough, Master Chief," Cale Thorne said, her voice rough from disuse but still carrying that edge that he remembered. Still carrying the absolute confidence of someone who'd survived things that should have killed her and come out harder for it. Hale was already moving, pulling bolt cutters from his kit, attacking the chains that held her. "Gonna get you out of here, ma'am. Got a bird inbound with enough firepower to level this entire facility." Cale shook her head, the motion seeming to cost her effort. "Can't. Not yet. There's something here. Something they were building. Something that explains why they kept me alive for 3 years instead of just putting a bullet in my head." Chains came free and she stood, unsteady but refusing help, moving to a workstation against the far wall. Her hands shook as she pulled open a drawer, removed a metal case about the size of a briefcase, and handed it to Hale. They were building drones. Autonomous attack drones with AI targeting systems, designed to mimic the flight characteristics of American combat aircraft. The plan was to use them for false flag operations. Send them to attack targets and make it look like the U.S. did it. Start wars, destabilize regions, all plausibly deniable because the drones would be destroyed on impact and the wreckage would match American aircraft signatures. Hale stared at her, then at the case in his hands. "Jesus Christ, who's behind this?" Cale's smile was terrible to see. "Take your pick. Russian intelligence, Chinese military-industrial complex. half a dozen private military contractors working for whoever pays the most. The beautiful thing about the modern military-industrial complex, Master Chief, is that loyalty is for sale to the highest bidder. They grabbed me because I knew too much about A-10 systems, because they needed someone who could help them perfect the flight characteristics. I played along for 3 years, fed them just enough real information to stay alive, and sabotaged everything else. The explosion that rocked the facility came from above, the B-1B's precision-guided munitions finding their targets with ruthless efficiency. The entire underground structure shook, dust and debris falling from the ceiling, support beams groaning under stress. Kale grabbed Hale's arm, her grip surprisingly strong for someone who looked half dead. There's another way out. Escape tunnel, far side of the complex. They built it as a contingency, never thought I'd figure out where it was. But I've had 3 years to explore, Master Chief. 3 years to plan. That A-10 I flew out 2 days ago was their prototype, the one they were going to use for the first attack. I sabotaged the targeting systems, made it so it could only be flown manually, then got myself out and came straight to Kandahar because I knew you'd see the message. Knew you'd come. Another explosion, closer now, and the sound of the attackers behind them was drowned out by the roar of the facility coming apart. Hale didn't ask more questions, just followed Kale as she moved through the underground complex with the confidence of someone who'd memorized every corridor, every turn, every escape route. The wounded SEAL was being helped by his teammate, keeping pace despite the blood loss because that's what SEALs did. They didn't quit. They didn't leave people behind. The escape tunnel was exactly where Kale said it would be, hidden behind a false wall in a storage room, leading upward at a steep angle. They climbed, weapons ready, the briefcase with the drone specifications strapped to Hale's back. Behind them, the facility was dying, crushed under thousands of pounds of bombs and collapsing under its own weight. They emerged into the desert night 200 meters from where the main entrance had been, coming up through a hatch that was camouflaged to look like a natural rock formation. The facility was gone, replaced by a crater that glowed orange with burning fuel and melting metal. The attackers were either dead or trapped inside. The mission that had existed for 3 years was over. Kale stood in the desert, looking up at the stars, breathing air that wasn't recycled, feeling wind that didn't come from ventilation systems. She'd escaped 2 days ago but hadn't really believed it until now, until she was standing under an open sky with people who'd come to bring her home. "I stole their prototype," she said to Hale, not looking at him. "Flew it to Kandahar because I knew the aircraft would prove what I'm telling you. The drone technology is real. The specifications in that case are real. There are more facilities like this one, and if we don't shut them down, eventually someone's going to succeed in using these drones to start a war." Hale looked at her, this woman who'd been officially dead for 3 years, who'd survived captivity that would have broken most people, who'd sabotaged an entire weapons development program from the inside and then stolen an aircraft to escape. "We'll shut them down," he said. "But first we're getting you medical attention, a hot meal, and about 6 months of debriefing." Kale laughed, and the sound was rusty but genuine. "Make it 3 months and you've got a deal, Master Chief." The extraction helicopter arrived 10 minutes later, and by the time the sun rose over Syria they were wheels up and heading back to friendly territory. Kale sat in the troop compartment, wrapped in a thermal blanket, an IV in her arm pushing fluids and medication, and she watched the desert disappear behind them through the open door. 3 years. 3 years of playing the long game, of pretending to cooperate while sabotaging every system they asked her to perfect, of memorizing layouts and guard schedules, and waiting for the moment when she could make her move. The A-10 they'd been converting into a drone had been her ticket out, but it had also been her proof. Physical evidence that couldn't be denied or classified into oblivion. The drone specifications in the briefcase were just documentation. The aircraft itself, sitting at Kandahar with 763 holes in it and systems that told the story of what it had been converted to do, that was the real smoking gun. Hale sat across from her, his weapon across his lap, watching her with the kind of respect that soldiers gave to other soldiers who'd done impossible things. "Your call sign," he said after a while. "Revenant. It means ghost, right? Someone who comes back from the dead." Cale smiled. "Originally, it was because I kept bringing damaged aircraft home when I should have ejected. But yeah, I guess it works for this too. Coming back from the dead. Coming back to haunt the bastards who thought they'd broken me." The debriefing, when it came, was exactly as brutal as Cale had expected. 3 months turned into 4, then 5, as intelligence agencies tore apart every detail of her story, verified every claim, tracked down every lead. The drone specifications led to 3 more underground facilities across Syria and Iraq, all of them raided and destroyed in coordinated strikes that were never reported in the media. The contractors who'd been running the operation scattered, but several were quietly arrested by their home governments, tried in closed courts, and disappeared into black site prisons. The program itself was dismantled, every piece of technology destroyed, every document sealed under classifications that would last decades. Cale told her story over and over, to Air Force investigators, to CIA analysts, to DoD officials, to JSOC commanders. She walked them through 3 years of captivity, 3 years of psychological warfare, 3 years of pretending to be broken while she systematically destroyed the program from the inside. She described the beatings when she refused to cooperate, the starvation when she sabotaged too obviously, the isolation when they wanted to break her spirit, the moments when she'd come so close to giving up, to just telling them what they wanted to know so the pain would stop. But she'd never given up because she'd been a pilot, and pilots didn't quit. They flew until the aircraft couldn't fly anymore, and even then they looked for ways to bring it home. The medical evaluation was almost worse than the debriefing. Malnutrition, dehydration, untreated injuries that had healed badly, psychological trauma that would take years of therapy to process. The doctors wanted to ground her permanently, declare her unfit for flight status, ease her into a medical retirement with full benefits and a quiet life somewhere far from combat zones. She'd listened to their recommendations with the patience of someone who'd spent 3 years being patient, and then she'd told them, very politely, to go to hell. She was going to fly again. She'd spent 3 years dreaming about it, planning for it, holding onto it like a lifeline when everything else was darkness. They'd taken 3 years of her life, but they hadn't taken her wings. The Air Force, to its credit, didn't fight her too hard. Maybe because her story had made it to enough high-level officials that grounding her would have been politically awkward. Maybe because they recognized that some people need purpose more than they need safety. Or maybe because they looked at her service record, at the things she'd accomplished before her capture and the things she'd accomplished during it, and realized that telling her no would be pointless. She passed the flight physical on her 3rd attempt, after 4 months of rehabilitation and training to rebuild muscle mass and reflexes. She passed the psychological evaluation by being honest about the nightmares and the hypervigilance and the moments when she still felt like she was underground in that facility, but convincing them that she could manage it, that she could do the job. And 8 months after she'd flown that stolen prototype A-10 into Kandahar, she sat in the cockpit of a Warthog again, this time her own aircraft, her own mission, and she felt whole for the first time since her capture. The ceremony, when they finally held it, was small and private. No media, no public recognition, because most of what Cale had done was still classified and would remain classified for years. Just a room full of people who knew the truth, who'd read the reports, who understood what she'd accomplished. 3 silver stars added to the one she already had. The Air Force Cross, second only to the Medal of Honor for extraordinary heroism in combat. A promotion to lieutenant colonel, backdated to account for the 3 years she'd been in captivity, and a new assignment, commanding officer of an A-10 squadron that specialized in close air support for Special Operations Forces. Master Chief Hale was there, in dress uniform, along with the rest of his team. They stood when she entered, and she saw something in their eyes that meant more than any medal. recognition, respect. The acknowledgement that she'd paid a price they understood, that she'd done things they could appreciate, that she was one of them in the way that mattered. After the ceremony, Hale approached her, his daughter beside him. The young woman who'd been wounded in that ambush 3 years ago, who'd survived because Cale had broken every rule to get her out. She was a doctor now, working at Walter Reed, using her experience as a combat medic to help others. "I wanted her to meet you properly," Hale said. "Not just as the pilot who saved her life, but as the woman who survived what came after." Cale shook the young woman's hand, saw her father's eyes in her face, saw the understanding there. "You would have done the same for me," she said simply. The first mission with her new squadron was routine by military standards, which meant it was dangerous as hell, but the kind of dangerous that military aviators got used to. Close air support for a SEAL team in Afghanistan, enemy contact in a valley where the terrain made everything complicated. Cale led a flight of 4 A-10s, coordinating with the ground team, putting precision fire on targets that were danger close to friendly forces, keeping the enemy pinned while the SEALs extracted a high-value target. It was the kind of mission she'd flown dozens of times before her capture, the kind of mission the A-10 was built for, and she flew it with the same competence and precision that had earned her reputation in the first place. But something was different now. The other pilots in her squadron watched her differently, flew with her differently. She'd come back from the dead, literally and figuratively, and that meant something in the tight-knit community of military aviators. It meant she was someone you could trust to get the job done, no matter what. It meant she was someone who wouldn't quit when things got hard. It meant she was someone worth following. After the mission, taxiing back to the flight line, she caught sight of herself in the canopy reflection. Older, harder, carrying scars that would never fully heal, but still here, still flying, still bringing people home. The call sign on her helmet still read, Revenant. But now it meant something more than just coming back from crashed aircraft. It meant coming back from the kind of darkness that swallowed most people whole. 6 months later, the intelligence community detected chatter about another drone development program, this one based in North Africa, using some of the same contractors who'd escaped the Syrian facility raids. The details were fragmentary, but the pattern was familiar enough to raise alarms. Someone was trying to resurrect the program, trying to build the same kind of autonomous attack drones that Cale had sabotaged. The targeting this time was different, focused on European military assets, designed to destabilize NATO and create conflict between Western allies. JSOC started planning a response, and that's when Cale got a call from a number she didn't recognize. She answered it in her quarters on base after hours when the squadron was quiet and she was alone with paperwork and coffee that had gone cold. "Lieutenant Colonel Thorne," said a voice she didn't know, professional and careful. "This is Colonel Marcus Webb, Defense Intelligence Agency. I need to discuss a matter that requires your particular expertise and experience. Are you on a secure line?" She wasn't, but she had access to one. 10 minutes later, she was in a SCIF, a sensitive compartmented information facility, speaking on an encrypted line to a DIA officer who laid out the situation with brutal efficiency. New drone program, North Africa, same technology. They needed someone who understood the systems, who could identify the facilities, who could help plan operations to shut it down before it became operational. They needed her. The operation took 3 months to plan and 48 hours to execute. Cale wasn't on the ground for the raids, but she was in the operations center at JSOC headquarters, providing real-time intelligence analysis, identifying drone components from satellite imagery, walking the assault teams through the technical specifications of what they were dismantling. There were 2 facilities this time, one in Libya and one in Algeria, both heavily guarded, both buried deep enough that they'd escape detection until the intelligence community started looking with very specific parameters based on Cale's experience. The raids were simultaneous, perfectly coordinated, special forces from 3 different nations hitting the targets at the same moment and destroying everything they found. No prisoners, no survivors among the contractors running the facilities. The message was clear. This technology wasn't acceptable. This program wouldn't be tolerated. Anyone who tried to resurrect it would face the same fate. Kale watched it happen on video feeds, listened to the radio traffic, and felt something that might have been closure but felt more like exhaustion. How many times would they have to shut this down? How many facilities were out there, hidden in deserts and mountains and underground bunkers, building weapons that could start wars and destabilize nations? "We got them all," Colonel Webb said when it was over, standing beside her in the operations center. "Every facility, every contractor, every piece of technology, the program is finished." Kale looked at him, this intelligence officer who seemed to believe that problems could be solved with enough force and determination, and she didn't have the heart to tell him he was wrong. There would always be another facility, another program, another group of people who thought they could profit from chaos. But for now it was over, and that was enough. Kale returned to her squadron, returned to flying missions that had clear objectives and straightforward enemies. She trained her pilots, led them in combat, brought them home safe. She got promoted again, made full colonel, took command of an entire wing. She spoke at military academies about resilience and adaptation, about surviving impossible situations, about the importance of holding onto your core identity when everything around you was trying to break it. She never talked about the nightmares, about the moments when she woke up in her quarters and thought for a terrible moment that she was still in that underground facility, still chained to a support column, still pretending to cooperate with people who wanted to use her knowledge to build weapons. That was private, something she dealt with in therapy sessions and quiet conversations with other veterans who understood what it meant to carry invisible wounds. The A-10 community, small and tight-knit and fiercely loyal to their unglamorous aircraft, embraced her as one of their own. The Warthog drivers, they called themselves, with pride that came from flying an aircraft that everyone else wanted to retire, but that kept proving its worth in combat. They understood what it meant to be underestimated, to be written off as obsolete, to prove everyone wrong by just doing the job better than anyone else could. Kale fit right in. Years passed. The world kept turning, conflicts kept erupting, and the A-10s kept flying close air support missions because no matter how many times someone tried to retire them, ground forces kept asking for them by name. The final piece of the story came 10 years after Kale's escape, in a secure briefing room in the Pentagon. She was there as a subject matter expert, advising on counter-drone technologies, when she saw a familiar face across the conference table. One of the contractors who'd run the Syrian facility. One of the men who'd kept her captive for 3 years, who'd ordered the beatings and the starvation and the psychological torture. He was there as a defense consultant, apparently having reinvented himself after the program shut down, now working for a legitimate company providing security services. He recognized her the moment she walked in, and the color drained from his face. She said nothing, just sat down, opened her briefing materials, and waited for the meeting to start. The contractor tried to participate normally, tried to pretend everything was fine, but his hands shook when he reached for his water glass and his voice cracked when he spoke. After 15 minutes, he excused himself, claimed he wasn't feeling well, and left the room. Kale never saw him again. She learned later that he'd resigned from his position, left the defense contracting world entirely, moved to South America, and dropped out of sight. Good enough. She wasn't interested in revenge, wasn't interested in seeing him prosecuted or punished. The fact that he had to live with what he'd done, that he had to look over his shoulder for the rest of his life wondering if someone would come for him, that was punishment enough. The story of Revenant became legend in special operations circles, passed down through generations of pilots and ground forces and intelligence officers. The details changed in the telling, got embellished and exaggerated, but the core remained the same. A pilot who'd been captured, who'd survived 3 years of captivity, who'd sabotaged an entire weapons program from the inside and then stolen an aircraft to escape. A woman who'd proven that the human spirit, properly motivated and absolutely stubborn, could overcome situations that seemed impossible. Cale heard the stories sometimes, passed along by junior officers who didn't realize they were talking to the actual person. She never corrected them. Let the legend be whatever it needed to be. Let it inspire people. Let it remind them that sometimes the only way out is through, that sometimes you have to play the long game, that sometimes survival itself is victory. Her squadron, now under someone else's command since she'd moved up to wing level, adopted a new unofficial motto: Per Caelum Revenimus. Through the sky we return. It was painted on the side of their A-10s, just small enough to be technically against regulations, but just meaningful enough that nobody made them remove it. The junior pilots, the ones who came up through training knowing Cale's story, flew with a particular edge. They knew what it meant to be part of a unit that valued competence over recognition, results over glory, bringing people home over personal advancement. They knew they were flying in the shadow of someone who'd proven that the mission mattered more than everything else. That reputation spread. Ground forces started requesting Cale's wing specifically for close air support, because they knew that when those ugly, slow, unglamorous A-10s showed up, the pilots flying them would stay on station until the job was done, would burn through every round of ammunition and every drop of fuel before they left, would break rules and ignore orders, and do whatever it took to bring people home. 20 years after her escape, Cale retired from active duty with 30 years of service and more decorations than she had room for on her dress uniform. The ceremony was public this time, because enough time had passed that some of the classified aspects of her story could be acknowledged. The Chief of Staff of the Air Force presented her with her retirement certificate and spoke about service and sacrifice, and the kind of dedication that inspired others. Master Chief Hale was there, retired himself now, his daughter beside him with children of her own. The SEALs who'd pulled Cale out of Syria were there, gray-haired and carrying their own stories of decades in special operations. The pilots from her squadron were there, current and former, 3 generations of Warthog drivers who'd learned their trade under her command or under the command of people she'd trained. After the ceremony, Cale stood on the flight line at Barksdale Air Force Base, looking at the A-10s parked in neat rows, and she thought about everything those ugly aircraft represented. Toughness, resilience, the willingness to take damage and keep flying, the absolute refusal to quit when quitting would be easier. Those were the values she'd tried to embody, tried to pass on, tried to build into the culture of every unit she'd commanded. Someone walked up beside her and she turned to find a young female pilot, probably mid-20s, wearing a flight suit with a name tag that read Wraith. Another ghost call sign. The tradition continued. "Ma'am," the pilot said, and there was nervousness in her voice but also determination. "I just wanted to say thank you. Your story is why I joined the Air Force, why I fought to get into A-10s. You proved that it doesn't matter what people think of you. It doesn't matter if they underestimate you. It just matters that you do the job and do it right." Cale looked at this young pilot, saw herself 25 years ago, and felt the weight of legacy settle onto her shoulders. Not a burden exactly, more like a responsibility. The stories people told about her would outlive her, would shape how future generations thought about service and sacrifice and what it meant to be a military pilot. That was humbling and terrifying in equal measure. "Don't try to live up to the legend," she said. "The legend is bullshit. Just fly your aircraft, take care of your people, and bring everyone home. That's all that matters." The young pilot nodded, saluted, and walked back toward the hangars. Cale watched her go, then looked back at the A-10s on the flight line. 30 years. 3 decades of flying, fighting, surviving, proving that the mission came first. It had been enough. More than enough. She walked away from the flight line, toward the parking lot where her truck waited, toward the rest of her life. Behind her, the sun was setting over the base, painting the sky in shades of orange and red and purple. The colors of fire and survival and coming home. The colors that every pilot knew by heart. As she drove through the base gate for the last time as an active duty officer, Cale looked in her rearview mirror at the hangars disappearing behind her. Somewhere in there, A new generation of pilots was preparing for their next mission. They'd fly through hostile fire, they'd take damage, they'd bring people home. Some of them would face impossible situations and find ways through them. That was the legacy, not the medals or the decorations or the stories. The simple fact that the mission would continue, that people would keep doing impossible things because someone before them had proven it was possible. The final part of Kale's story, the part that matters most, isn't about captivity or escape or medals earned. It's about what happened 15 years into her retirement when she got a call from a number she didn't recognize. She answered it in her home office, surrounded by photos from 3 decades of service, books on aviation and military history, and the quiet peace of a life well lived. "Is this Colonel Cale Thorne?" asked a young woman's voice, nervous and formal. "It is," Cale said. "What can I do for you?" There was a pause, then the words came out in a rush. "Ma'am, my name is Captain Sarah Chen. I'm stationed at Bagram, and I'm calling because I need advice. I'm in a situation that's classified above my clearance level. I can't talk to my chain of command about it, but I've been read into something that's wrong, and I don't know what to do. And everyone keeps telling me your story when I ask about what to do when the system fails you." Cale sat up straighter, the peaceful retirement evaporating in an instant. "Tell me everything," she said. The young captain talked for 30 minutes, describing a situation that sounded horrifyingly familiar. A classified program that wasn't what it seemed. Contractors operating outside normal oversight. Technology being developed for purposes that violated international law. And a pilot who'd been brought in for her expertise but who'd realized too late that she was being used for something terrible. Cale listened, asked careful questions, and felt the years drop away. This was why the story mattered. Not for glory, not for recognition, but because sometimes people needed to know that others had faced impossible choices and found ways through them. "Here's what you're going to do," Cale said when the captain had finished. "First, document everything. Every conversation, every piece of technology, every detail that doesn't feel right. Build a case so solid that they can't make it disappear. Second, find people you trust, people who have proven they'll do the right thing even when it's hard. You can't do this alone. Third, don't try to be a hero. Your job is to survive long enough to get the truth out. If that means playing along, if that means pretending to cooperate, then do it. Survival first, justice second." There was silence on the other end of the line, then a shaky breath. "Ma'am, they told me you spent 3 years in captivity because you wouldn't compromise. Why are you telling me it's okay to pretend?" Cale smiled, though the young captain couldn't see it. "I spent 3 years in captivity because I got caught. The point isn't to be captured in the first place. Be smarter than I was. Use the system instead of fighting it head-on. Find the people with the power to help you and give them the information they need to take action. You don't have to be revenant. You just have to bring the truth home." They talked for another hour, Cale walking the young captain through strategies for documentation, for communication, for building a case that could survive scrutiny. By the time they hung up, Captain Chen sounded steadier, more confident, ready to do what needed to be done. Cale sat in her office for a long time after the call ended, looking at the photos on her walls. Master Chief Hale and his team, her squadron's decades of pilots, the A-10s that had brought her home more times than she could count. That's the real legacy of Revenant, not the survival or the escape or the medals. The fact that 30 years after she proved it was possible to come back from the impossible, people still called her when they faced their own impossible situations, still asked for advice, still looked to her story for proof that doing the right thing, no matter the cost, was worth it. 6 months after that phone call, Captain Chen's whistleblower report led to congressional hearings, criminal investigations, and the shutdown of another classified program that had gone off the rails. The young captain received protection under whistleblower statutes, kept her career, and eventually made lieutenant colonel herself. She never told the public about the phone call that had given her the courage to come forward, but she sent Cale a message through secure channels. Just 3 words. "Mission complete, ma'am." Cale read it and smiled. The work continued. The mission went on. And somewhere another pilot was learning that the sky wasn't a limit, it was a promise. The promise that no matter how far you fell, no matter how dark things got, there was always a way home. You just had to be stubborn enough to find it. When she died, 25 years into retirement, peacefully in her sleep at the age of 73, the funeral was attended by 3 generations of military aviators, special operations forces, and people whose lives she'd touched in ways both large and small. They told the stories, the missions she'd flown, the impossible situations she'd survived, the people she'd brought home, and they understood that the real measure of a life wasn't the duration but the impact. The A-10 community, still flying their ugly, beloved warthogs despite decades of attempts to retire them, named a scholarship in her honor. The Revenant Award, given annually to a pilot who demonstrated exceptional resilience, tactical excellence, and commitment to bringing people home regardless of personal cost. Master Chief Hale's granddaughter, following in her grandmother's footsteps as a Navy corpsman, attended the first awards ceremony and spoke about the day her grandmother had been carried out of the desert in the back of an A-10 that shouldn't have been able to land, shouldn't have been able to take off again, but had done both because the pilot flying it refused to leave anyone behind. The SEALs who'd pulled Kale out of Syria held their own memorial, private and solemn, drinking to her memory and telling the stories that were still too classified for public consumption. They remembered the woman they'd found chained in an underground facility, half dead but still fighting, still planning, still determined to survive and complete the mission. They remembered her strength, her competence, her absolute refusal to quit. Those memories mattered more than any public recognition. The military is full of people who do extraordinary things that never make the headlines, never get recognition, never become public knowledge. Kale had been one of those people, and she'd done it knowing that most of what she accomplished would remain classified for decades. She'd done it anyway because the mission mattered more than the recognition. That was the ultimate lesson of Revenant, not that you should seek glory or fame or recognition. Just that you should do the job, take care of your people and bring everyone home. Everything else was just noise. Years later, when the classified files from Kale's service were finally declassified under the automatic review process, historians and military analysts pored over them with fascination. The drone program she'd sabotaged, the intelligence she'd gathered, the operations she'd enabled, the lives she'd saved. The full scope of her career, laid out in documentation and after-action reports and mission logs, was staggering. She'd flown over 300 combat missions, saved countless lives, prevented at least 2 major international incidents, and served with distinction for 3 decades. But more than the statistics, the documents revealed something else. In every mission brief, every after-action report, every evaluation written by her commanders, the same words appeared. Brings people home. That was the core of who Kale Thorne had been. Not a fighter pilot, though she was that. Not a survivor, though she was that too. She was someone who brought people home, who made that her mission, her purpose, her reason for existing. And in a military that dealt in violence and strategy and geopolitical maneuvering, that simple commitment to bringing people home was revolutionary. The documentaries came later, produced by military historians and aviation enthusiasts. They told her story with the benefit of declassified information, interviewed the people who'd served with her, examined the impact she'd had on military aviation and special operations doctrine. They got most of the facts right, but they missed the essential truth. The truth that could only be understood by the people who'd been there, who'd heard her voice on the radio when everything was falling apart, who'd seen her aircraft appear through the smoke and chaos, who'd felt the relief of knowing that Revenant was on station and wasn't leaving until everyone made it home. The A-10 Thunderbolt II that Kale had flown to Kandahar that night, the prototype drone that she'd stolen and sabotaged and used to escape, was eventually recovered from storage and put on display at the National Museum of the United States Air Force. It sat in the modern flight gallery, restored to the condition it had been in when it landed, complete with 763 patched holes, and the grease pencil message on the dash panel preserved behind protective glass. Tell Ironside his daughter came back. Visitors walked past it every day, read the placard that explained its significance in frustratingly vague terms due to ongoing classification, and took photos beside the weathered fuselage. Most of them didn't understand the full story, didn't know about the underground facility or the 3 years of captivity or the weapons program that had almost started wars. But they understood the essential truth. This aircraft represented something important. Something about resilience and determination and refusing to quit. Something about coming home against all odds. That was enough. The young pilots who visited the museum, considering careers in military aviation, stood before that and felt something stir inside them. The desire to matter, to make a difference, to be the kind of person who brought others home. Some of them would succeed. Some would face their own impossible situations and find ways through them. Some would tell their own stories that would inspire future generations. The cycle continued. On the 50th anniversary of Cale's escape from Syria, a small group gathered at Arlington National Cemetery, where she'd been laid to rest with full military honors. Master Chief Hale's great-granddaughter was there, a pilot herself now, flying F-35s but with a deep respect for the Warthog community and what they represented. The current commander of the A-10 wing that Cale had once led was there, carrying on traditions that stretched back decades. And a handful of very old special operators, some in wheelchairs, some using canes, all of them wearing their dress uniforms despite the fact that the medals and decorations weighed heavy on aged shoulders. They stood at Cale's grave in silence, remembering. Not the legend, not the stories, but the woman herself. The pilot who'd saved their lives. The commander who'd trained them, the friend who'd understood what it meant to serve. After a while, one of the old SEALs spoke. Told me once that the sky was the only place she felt free, that being in the cockpit was the only time the world made sense. Even after everything that happened to her, even after 3 years in captivity, she went back to flying because that's where she belonged. Another nodded. She brought us home, all of us in one way or another. That's what mattered to her. Not the glory, not the recognition, just bringing people home. They stood there a while longer, then saluted in unison and walked away. Behind them, Cale's headstone stood in perfect alignment with thousands of others, marking the resting place of someone who'd served with honor and distinction. The inscription was simple: name, rank, dates of service, and below that just 3 words: brought them home. The final word on Revenant came not from military channels or government officials or historians, but from an unlikely source. A retired Russian intelligence officer, giving an interview late in life about Cold War operations and modern intelligence challenges, was asked about autonomous weapons systems and the programs that various nations had pursued. He paused, looked uncomfortable, then spoke carefully. There was an American pilot. We never got her name. Never confirmed her identity, but we knew she existed. She destroyed a multi-billion-dollar program that would have changed modern warfare. Did it from the inside over 3 years while we thought she was cooperating. Most effective intelligence operation I ever saw, and she did it alone with no support, no handler, nothing but her own determination. If I could have recruited her, I would have paid anything. But people like that don't work for countries or ideologies. They work for something else, something we couldn't touch. The interviewer asked what he meant. The old Russian smiled. Purpose. She had purpose. That's more powerful than any weapon system, any amount of money, any political motivation. You can't buy it, can't threaten it, can't break it. You can only hope you're on the same side as someone who has it, because if they're against you, you've already lost. That statement, made decades after the events it referenced, captured the essence of what Cale Thorne had represented. Not a hero in the traditional sense, not someone seeking glory or recognition, but someone with absolute clarity of purpose who would not be deterred no matter what obstacles were placed in her path. That clarity, that purpose, had saved lives, prevented wars, and inspired generations of military aviators to believe that doing the right thing was worth any cost. In the end, the story of Revenant isn't really about one person or one aircraft or one mission. It's about the idea that competence and determination can overcome situations that seem impossible. That being underestimated is an advantage if you're smart enough to use it. That the mission comes first, always, no matter what the personal cost. That bringing people home is the highest calling of military service. These ideas, embodied in the life and service of Cale Thorne, spread through the military community like wildfire. They changed how pilots trained, how commanders led, how special operations forces approached impossible missions. They reminded everyone that sometimes the most important battles are the ones nobody sees, the ones that happen in underground facilities and classified programs, and the human heart when it refuses to break. The A-10 community kept those ideas alive, passing them from generation to generation, ensuring that new pilots understood what it meant to fly in the shadow of someone who'd proven that ugly, slow, unglamorous persistence could achieve things that speed and stealth and overwhelming force could not. And somewhere, in squadron-ready rooms and special operations team houses and intelligence facilities around the world, people still told the story. Changed the details, embellished the legend, but kept the core truth intact. There was a pilot called Revenant who proved that coming back from the impossible was just a matter of being too stubborn to quit. That survival itself could be victory. That bringing people home was worth everything. That's the legacy. That's what matters. That's what endures long after the metals tarnish and the aircraft are retired and the people who were there are gone. The idea that no situation is truly impossible if you refuse to accept defeat. The idea that purpose can sustain you through darkness that would break others. The idea that bringing people home is the highest form of service. Those ideas don't die. They're passed down, generation after generation, keeping alive the memory of a pilot who became a ghost, who came back from the dead, who proved that the only way out is through and that the mission always, always comes first.